Over the years as a coach, I have collected quite a few letters behind my name, just meaning that I have a bunch of certifications that nobody cares about in order to try to be better at my job. And one of my favorite ones was the ultra running coaching certification from UESCA, the United Endurance Sports Coaching Academy. I found it really helpful. For one, it was affordable, which is not always true with these things, and it provided a bunch of simple, actionable information to help me train trail runners to be better out on the trail. This week, I have Rick Prince on the podcast. He is the founder of UESCA, and we talked about his background, why UESCA is different, and why we need another certification in this seemingly saturated market of coaching organizations and certs. So if you're a coach and looking to maybe get a certification, this is definitely up your alley. If you're not, and you just want to know what you're looking for in a coach who has various letters behind their name, or if you just want to spend a few $100s to learn how to train so that you can coach yourself even better. So that's what this one's about. I think it's probably geared a little more towards coaches, but you can still get a lot out of it, even if you have no interest in coaching other people. Let's get to it. Welcome to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. My name is Will Franz, and I'm here to help you improve your training so you can have more fun out on the trails. This week on the podcast, I have Rick Prince. He is the founder of UESCA, a endurance-focused coaching certification organization. And Rick, I'm going to kind of introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and where you come from.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for the intro. Yeah, my name is Rick Prince. I'm the founder of United Endurance Sports Coaching Academy, or UESCA. My background is full from a sporting background. I've always been into endurance sports, primarily as a cyclist. And then in college, I got burned out of cycling. So I went to running. I ran collegiate track and cross country. And then since then, I've just been sort of doing a little bit of biking, a little bit of running here and there, nothing too crazy. And I started UESCA, back in like 2014. It was a very soft launch. Started off as a side gig. I was primarily working as a personal trainer in New York City. That's my primary, sort of work background. Lived there for about 20 years. And then I just saw a need for, I should say the coaching industry is very similar to the fitness industry, that it's unregulated. And as a result, there's a lot of, we'll call it not so great trainers, not so great coaches. And just because you have a certification doesn't mean you're great either. But I just felt like the bar could be, needed to be risen a little bit. And that was the catalyst for starting UESCA, just to kind of get a little more science-based information out there to coaches.
Oh man, yeah, fair. I'm over here like giggling on mute because, to say it's unregulated and hit or miss is an understatement for sure.
Yeah.
So a little bit on you. How did you get into cycling, and like when did that start?
Yeah, so it's actually kind of a funny story. A buddy of mine came over to my house one time. His dad was into cycling, and he had this really cool helmet. And I'm like, that looks like a motorcycle helmet. That's awesome. But of course, my parents wouldn't let me get a motorcycle. I was 14 years old, So instead of going the leather route, I went the spandex route instead. So I got into cycling when I was about 14 and raced, fairly competitively and quite a bit, in my teenage years up until about 18, 19. And like I said, then I kind of got a little burned out and did some running and stuff like that. And then ever since then, like I said, it's just been nothing too competitive, just more of just casually, just to stay in shape and burn off some stress, stuff like that.
Cool, man. I don't think I've known anybody who's like started cycling that early. Like in my life, it's usually, I found it in my early 20s, and that's like one of the earlier I've known, honestly. What does that competitive circuit look like at that young age for cycling?
Yeah, well, at the time, road cycling was mostly road cycling. I did some mountain bike racing, but it was really, really big. Now it's almost non-existent, primarily, I think, because of, when I started racing, it was 14. That was like 1988 to age myself. So that was before cell phones, distracted driving, and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And,
Yeah.
you can't go a week now without reading the news, about someone getting run over by a car, or,
Yeah.
killed or seriously hurt. So it's really changed the landscape a lot. And I think, so there's just not a lot of races on offered anymore. So I guess it's a long-winded way of answering your question. It was pretty competitive when I was doing it. I had a chance also to go over to Europe, to Belgium and Holland, to race, which is sort of the mecca of road racing. It still is. It's like, if you want to, see how you stack up against the best, you go over to Belgium and Holland and get your butt kicked in, and you come back
Wow.
pretty humble, which is what
That's
happened to
cool.
me. Um,
It's
but
fair. Yeah.
but yeah, I got destroyed over there. But yeah, but now it seems that it's just not that big of a deal. But like, for example, when I raced nationals one year, I think I was 17. It was in Bear Mountain State Park in New York, and there were heats of 100, and I think it was heats of 100 junior riders, and there
Oh,
were,
wow.
so 18 and under, and there were like 3 or 4 heats, and only the top 25 made it to the final heat. And I was talking to one of our cycling contributors just recently, and I think it was last year's nationals. There were like 25 kids in total. So it's
Wow.
seen a huge shift. I think, Lance Armstrong, before his sort of downfall, that really helped out road cycling a lot.
Sure.
And even though there's probably more really good Americans right now racing over in Europe professionally and doing really, really well. Like an American just won the Tour of Spain, which is one of the
Hmm.
big grand tours similar to the Tour de France. They're not that same brand name and that same, for better or worse, sort of, Lance Armstrong-ish personality. So it doesn't have the story behind it. They didn't beat cancer. They didn't do all that kind of stuff. So yeah, ever since Lance Armstrong, really, honestly, it's sort of been in a downward spiral. Road cycling, at least, gravel cycling's pretty
Of
big
course.
now.
Yeah.
Indoor riding, like those indoor platforms like Zwift, are big. Again, I would make the argument largely because when you're riding on gravel and these, sort of, desolate roads and indoor, certainly your chances of getting hit by a car are a lot less than on the road. So I do think that the whole distracted driving has a large influence on sort of the decline of road cycling.
Interesting, man. Yeah, like I've never really put that together, but I mean, you're right. I think I've been tapped twice and like nothing major, but I know people who've died. And it's
Yeah,
not, it's kind of scary out there. And I've been
it
very privileged
is.
to be here in the West, right? So like it's not that it doesn't happen here. It absolutely does. Like one of the people, like a friend of a friend, died out here on a road, but at least like you tend to have a shoulder that's almost the size of another lane. Whereas
Yeah.
like I remember back east, my dad was a big cyclist before. So I grew up in Mexico and then we spent a bunch of time in Pennsylvania and then back to New Mexico. And the time in
Mm,
Pennsylvania, my dad just stopped cycling because it was terrifying. He's just like, I'm too
yeah.
squared to ride out here. So
Yeah.
absolutely,
Where,
yeah, I
where in
can feel that.
Pennsylvania?
Lancaster in the middle of Amish country.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I grew up in the Poconos.
Oh, okay.
And
Nice, man.
there's the riding from a terrain perspective is amazing, but you're right.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
no shoulders. And, I'm lucky I made it out in one piece, and it's kind of ironic too, like living in New York City. I would, to get to my personal training clients, I would ride my bike because that was the fastest,
Hmm.
most predictable way. Um, and I actually felt fairly safe there because traffic doesn't move too fast. There's
Sure.
always tons of cyclists, whether it be commuters, bike messengers, food delivery guys. So people are always on looking out for cyclists.
Hmm.
But yet, so it's kind of funny. Like people think, oh, you're crazy to ride in Manhattan. Actually, I felt quite safe there. Where I felt unsafe was getting out to where I am now, riding on the roads. Fortunately, there's a lot of bike paths where I am. But if you're not on a bike path, I definitely feel a little more worried, for lack of a better word, here than I did in New York City, which is kind of weird to say, actually.
No, I hear it. It does feel kind of counterintuitive, but I've heard the same from a bunch of people. Like a few of my friends went to NYU, and
Yeah,
a couple of them like bike to bike to school literally every day. Like one dude almost
yeah.
took it as a challenge. Like he'd ride his fixie through the snow and the ice. Um,
Oh, that's
but
funny.
yeah, it was a move of 20-year-old whatever. But
Yeah.
yeah, but it's like they never felt all that concerned. I mean, they said they had a couple of close calls, but it wasn't anything major.
Sure.
Like my couple of taps, but it definitely wasn't like here. If you're going to get hit, you're going to get hit at 50 miles an hour, and like that's
Right.
really
Exactly.
the big problem, right? Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So how
Yeah.
did you make that shift from, you say you kind of got burnt out, that shift from cycling to collegiate track and cross country? I usually actually I hear people go the other direction where they're runners for a while and then kind of get burnt out and go to cycling.
Yeah.
What is
Yeah.
how did that shift look? Like was that kind of a weird transfer? Did your cardio just carry you? Like how did that look?
Yeah, I mean, kind of. The cardio, the engine was good, the legs were not. So I got injured a lot. I didn't know what I
Sure.
was doing. I spent half the year like in the pool doing like water jogging because I got a bunch of stress fractures. And
Yeah.
my track coach was very like old school, just run a lot, run hard. There was not a lot of science behind it, let's put it that way. I got
Sure.
fitter, and I enjoyed it. And honestly, I think, the thing with cycling, right, is you're on a bike, you can get flat tires in bike races. There's a lot of tactics, there's drafting. And one thing I really liked about running was that while in theory there are some tactics, but there's not a lot. It's basically just pacing, and I you can get hurt, of course, but you're not going to get a flat tire. And so I kind of like the fact that there were less variables to deal with in running. I didn't really enjoy running track so much. My coach put me in everything from the 800 up to the, I think it was up to the 10,000. Um,
Oh my
yeah,
God.
like this huge
Like
range.
what a disparity between those two. Yeah.
Yeah, oh my, it was awful. He even threw me in the steeplechase one time. We were running against MIT, and they were like our main competitor or whatever, rival, I guess. And we were missing a person, so he threw me in the steeplechase, which was an absolute disaster. Um, but yeah, no, it was fun, but I had no idea what I was doing. I was just getting out there and running, and doing my best. But I had a lot of fun. Made a lot of good friends, and it was enjoyable.
That's awesome, man. And yeah, I feel like
Yeah.
some of that is more common than maybe we'd like. I mean, I realize it was the early 90s, that's what it was. It was like early to mid 90s, but it's like so many people, even now, I'm coaching this kid, he's 25, and his coach is very old school. And he was a tennis player, and he's just like wrecked. Like he's doing really
Yeah.
well now, but like when he left college, like dorsal tendon on his or dorsal ligaments on his ankle were destroyed, his shoulders ruined because there's no tactical weight training or lifting or strength or anything. Like they didn't like,
Oh
oh,
yeah,
what's wrong
for
with your
sure.
rotator cuff? Like, why can we not get this extension overhead? It was like just lift heavier and then go get faster and then play more
Yeah.
tennis. And it just
Yeah.
ruined this kid. And I think this is really common across the board from this like old school mentality of coaching.
Yeah, I would agree. And the ironic thing is, where I went to school, Springfield College in Massachusetts, what they're known for is well, they were one of the first schools to have a physical education curriculum. That it was the school where James Naismith invented basketball. So the only
Oh,
reason you
sure.
go to this school basically is for something allied health, physical
Mm,
therapy, kinesiology. So, but despite all that, the sport training was, at least what I experienced in track and to some degree cross country, was just run a lot, run hard. And for someone like and most everyone ran in high school, most people even ran in middle school. Like I think I was one of the few that never really ran before. I just started in college, and
yeah.
so I really had no idea what I was doing. But I think so it's just maybe one of the reasons I got injured more. But so yeah, the whole like just run a lot and run faster, run further, run harder didn't really mesh so well with my body.
For sure, man. I mean, I think this is kind of the old school where it's like it's almost like a weeding out process rather than a building, where like
Yeah.
oh, you're good in middle school, so you become good in high school. So we just like end up selecting from this like genetic pool who are lucky enough to do this sport well versus
Yeah.
like, well, sure, maybe you're going to get top of the podium, but maybe let's also build up the other dude that we decided is going to be on the team. Like I find that frustrating where it's not like we're not trying to take everybody and make them a better athlete or give them a good experience. It's almost like building for the program to some degree. And I realize like
Mhm.
you have to do that a little bit, but at the expense of a kid's health is not. I'm not a fan.
Yeah, yeah. No, I would agree. I would agree.
So I mean, like some of this you see. I noticed you mentioned there's like no science behind the training in your like early to mid 90s, and that's kind of what I've noticed you hang the hat on for UESCA. So it's kind of leads into like how did UESCA get started? Like what made you decide that you wanted to create a new cert program?
Yeah, well, kind of as we were speaking about, my primary work history has been in the fitness industry, personal training, which again really mirrors the coaching industry.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I did coaching as well. I was a bike coach and all that stuff, and worked with some runners. And yeah, and I realized that for as lacking as the fitness industry is, as far as what I view as good certifications or really quality stuff, the endurance sports coaching industry has almost nothing. And when I started looking at what was out there, the different certification programs, and I'm like, this stuff is just not great, for lack of a better word. And I just felt that it was antiquated, most of the content. B, it was very just general. It was very not really that helpful. So I just thought I could do a better job at it. Quite frankly, I could put out there something better. And it's kind of funny too, because it feels funny saying this because I run a certification company, but I'm not necessarily a huge fan of certifications for certification's purpose,
Same.
at least in my background in fitness, because I viewed a lot of them as just money grabs, just create something, charge a lot of money for it. People will say they're certified, but the content isn't that great. So I wanted to put something out there that was very science based. So, people like myself wouldn't have the same experience from coaching in college as I had to be on the user end, on the athlete end. And just put out good stuff and hopefully, raise the bar of the coaching industry. Again, not that, and I always say this, it's just because you have a certification doesn't make you a great coach. You could still be a terrible coach, but at least you'll have the knowledge of sort of how the body works and hopefully how to apply it. It's up to the coach to apply it properly. And I'm sure there's a lot out there that take our certifications that do the same kind of stuff that they were doing before they took our certifications.
I'm sure.
And that's just what it is. And that's fine. But yeah, that was sort of the goal, was just to increase the level of content out there in the world of coaching, and then making it into a certification that people could use as a credential.
I like that. And I mean, I feel like to some degree I mean, you're working with humans, right? Like we're weird, flawed creatures. Like none of us quite work the same. So, and I mean that both mentally but specifically physically here. Like my injury history and damage tends to lead me to move in different ways than what a textbook would tell you is the right
Yeah.
way to move. And you don't learn how to deal with those cases until you've dealt with those cases, right? So I feel
Yeah.
like to some degree, coaching or maybe 90% actually, if I'm going to be honest, is just experience and getting your reps in and doing the work. But
Yeah.
starting from a foundation that actually makes sense does help. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I guess what sets you apart from other certs? And I'll be honest, like the only cert I have from y'all is the ultra running one, because that is mostly who I coach. And I do not have other endurance certs. I have training and nutrition and all this stuff to no end, but nobody really cares about the letter behind my name, so I just don't care about posting them. But
Yep.
as far as like UESCA, how does like let's say your running certification differ from multiple other ones? I was going to label one, but I'd rather not call anybody out by name. So like, how does it differ from other ones? You're welcome to if you want. I just don't want to put that on you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I think one of probably the biggest one, I think, is that we go out of our way to get the best, what we view as the best and most knowledgeable people in specific areas. There are quite a few certifications that are sort of system based, and it's an individual that creates it, meaning almost like step one, step two, step three, here's what you do to become a coach, or here's how you coach athletes, or here's my system. This is how you need to coach athletes. And as you alluded to, the individuals are all different. You can't lump everyone into the same category. And also, we also UESCA, or I should say, I don't feel it's correct to just put out my theory of exercise. I have a theory, but it's largely based off of what everyone else, all these other experts tell me. I think it gets
Yeah.
dangerous when someone has a system, for lack of a better word, or it can be dangerous because it might work great for someone, but it might work not so great for someone else. So we don't create any of our own content. We reach out to experts in specific areas, whether it be aerodynamics or physiology or environmental physiology or nutrition, and they create the content, and then we put it all together into a certification because we feel that that's the best way to do it. It's like you wouldn't go out to an orthopedic surgeon and want them to do your heart surgery and vice versa, right? But yet that's essentially what happens in a lot of these certifications. You just have a generic expert talking about all these different areas. Well, you can't be an expert in all these areas. You can have a little bit of knowledge in these areas, but you're not going to be an expert in all these. So my take on it is, if we're putting out a product, if someone's paying money for it, they deserve to have the best possible quality. And we feel the best way to do that is to get experts in each specific area to create the content.
Makes a ton of sense. So, I mean, I guess God, there's a few different ways to take that. So one of the things I want to say, I agree completely on the jamming people into a system thing. It always kind of worries me when there's a method or a system or whatever associated with whatever. And I also realize that it's very good for marketing. If you have
of course,
whatever method,
yeah,
you can trademark it, you can whatever, and it makes you very easily searchable and
sure,
whatnot. But it often leads, not always. I've seen people that basically they use it for marketing and they're like, but we're not going to do that. But for the most part,
right.
it leads to you jamming thousands of people into something that's going to work for half of those people and either break or not help the other half. Right. So
Right.
I agree more. So if we look at, again, how this might differ from stuff from other certs, since I don't have them, a lot of people listening to this won't. They're just looking at coaches who have them. Do other certifications just have some human coaching everything from nutrition to strength to whatever, even though they don't really have an individual background in all of that?
There is some of that for sure. A lot of it has to do with, there are some out there that have, running technique, more form-based type stuff. And there are some out there also that do have multiple contributors, but a lot of those, again, are a little bit antiquated, in my opinion. And I think that, maybe the presenters aren't as accomplished or, science-based also and evidence-based, to really be providing great information. Again, that's not to say they're bad,
Sure.
Again, I think what's great about it is anytime someone purchases a certification, whether it be through UESCA or whoever else, it's great because they want to take that next step forward, to educate themselves more, to learn more, to be a better resource for their athletes. So I should put out there, it's not that these other certifications are necessarily bad. We take a different approach to it, but I would certainly commend anybody that is going that extra step to get certified, to learn more, regardless of who they get certified for, or even just, it doesn't even have to be a certification. They can be, reading journal articles online or just doing a lot of research. And that's the best way forward is to just, just get as much information as possible, whether that be through a certification and or their own studies, however they choose to do it. So
I appreciate that because, yeah, my education has been very hodgepodge, as I feel like it kind of needs to be. On that end, though, I do think that it can be really difficult to tell who actually knows what they're talking about if you're a layperson, right? And I include myself in that to some degree, where it's I'm not a researcher. I don't know the amount of data on anything. So if we look I started more in the nutrition space. So if we just look at two really easy examples that I bring up a lot, there's Michael Greger's book, How Not to Die, and it's a very vegan propaganda book. And then there's Paul Saladino's like the carnivore book, and it's a very carnivore propaganda book. Both of them have hundreds and hundreds of citations through this, and both of them, if you
Sure.
take them from the like litany of data or like the totality of data, are not complete. And so if we take this from a like coaching perspective and a trying to figure out who to listen to, how do you or your people, or how should someone go about vetting and trying to figure out whether the person that they're listening to has an actual understanding of the topic as a whole?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's maybe the best way to answer is that it's very, very difficult. It's very difficult,
Mm-hmm.
especially if I'm not academic. I mean, I have a degree in kinesiology, but I'm not a academic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think one of the problems in is, you were at the ultra running conferences, I
Yeah.
think Jason Koop put out there and Dr. Nick Tiller. Social media now has so much effect on what people you know listen to, watch, and what becomes sort of their basis for information, or what they then consider fact. And I think, and also the attention span goes down, because whether it be TikTok or a story on Facebook, everything is in little snippets, everything's in little
Mm-hmm.
headlines, right? And you read a headline, and without getting any substance, you say, okay, then this is good, that's bad, right? And it's
Mm-hmm.
it's extremely difficult. I think, to answer your question, is to see who's putting out real information. Like you said, it's pretty easy to see when there's a bias, right? To say, you should only eat this diet because vegan is the way to go, or we're carnivores, that's why we have our incisor teeth, this is what you need to be eating. It's pretty easy to spot bias. And and again, I mean, we all have our own biases, right? But I think one of the things you can do is go on a website like PubMed, PubMed, and then look to see who is putting out information on nutrition, or whatever field it is. And you don't have to read the entire thing. You can read the abstracts and just kind of see where they're leaning. But generally, I like to look at people who are in this space, have been in the space for a while, and ideally have published research. Someone that's really in it, who understands the methods of doing proper research. Again, that doesn't automatically make someone right or wrong, but I think it shows you that those people have a little bit more open mind to when it comes to information, and there's probably less bias involved. That being said, it's funny. Like you said, UESCA does to some degree hang its hat on, the
Mm-hmm.
information is research based and science based. But I can look at any article and I can spin it however I want. I can cherry pick a little thing out of it and make it something completely different than what
Yeah.
the authors actually wanted, right? So I think that's the other thing that people have to be aware of. Just because there's citations, you really, as an individual, you really have to read it yourself. Because if you just say, well, hey, Will said this and he cited this article and therefore it's the truth, well, you might have just spun it that way, right? And so
Yeah.
it is difficult. It is very difficult. But I would say, I will caution people. Oftentimes, the loudest voice in the room is not the most factual. Maybe they have the most traction because of social media. Maybe you have this, but so I wouldn't. And a lot of the people in academics, right? They're not putting stuff out on social media. They're heads down in the books, putting stuff out
Mm-hmm.
in journals. So, and those are usually the people that really know the most. So, oftentimes, the most commercially uh, people that do it the most commercially, the names that you and I hear are the most, oftentimes they're not the experts or the utmost experts. The top experts are not putting out their stuff on social media oftentimes. So
Very true.
just because it's out, just because you hear someone's name a lot in a space doesn't necessarily make them an expert.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And I'll say on my end, I often look at like what the person is trying to sell me. Um, Everybody's trying to sell something. I mean, I'm me too, you as well. Like we both have our
Sure,
businesses, but
sure.
I I find, especially after doing this for a few years, a pretty marked difference in the quality of information I get from someone trying to sell me a lot of small things versus like something big that requires them a lot of work, right? So for me, like I'm
Yeah.
a coach, um, I'm trying to sell you a coaching package, which is somewhat expensive and it requires me a lot of work. Whereas something like I'm going to pick on Paul because Paul Saladino is terrible and worse by the month. He's trying to sell you supplements in a book. And if we're like, that requires no work from him to make a ton of money. And usually, if that is like the business model, that tends to lead to laziness or propaganda. And
Mhm.
I that's kind of why I really appreciate your search that they're excited. They do bring in experts like Coop is, I mean, he's trained everybody from Carnassus to whatever for the past 20 years. And it is he knows how to get results. And I feel
Yeah.
like across the board, that's kind of what you're looking for, someone who actually, especially in the coaching realm, someone who actually has a wide and current also space in the coaching realm.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head also with being current. Just because something was great 10 years ago doesn't necessarily make it great now. I guess the other case for determining who people should listen to or not listen to. I think this goes also back to education again, whether you're educated through college certifications or your own study. You can pick out the BS better then, because you'll know what is factual, what's not factual, or
Yeah.
not. I mean, not all the time, but that way at least you'll be able to pick up on things when there's a little bit more of a bias, whether that be only eat meat or don't eat meat, or
Mm-hmm.
train this way or don't train that way. And as you know from our certifications, it's very rare that we put definitively do this or don't do that. There's a few cases, I think, in our certifications, but by and large, it's putting out the information on both sides of the topic, or just here's all the information about a particular thing. Um, and then it's up to you as a coach to learn how to apply that on an individual basis to your athlete or athletes, which is why we also stress a lot of the physiology and biomechanics and how the body works, so that once you have that knowledge, you can apply it on an individual basis. But yeah, very rarely do we say this is how you have to do it. This is right. That's wrong. That's a very, very rare. And I think that's because, again, what could be totally horrible for you could be totally perfect for me, and vice versa. And that's just a reality.
Yeah, I agree. I think overgeneralization is one of the larger problems in the coaching space and probably in general, but like that's not my world. So if we look at, I have an NASM cert and I'm happy to talk positives and negatives on them. It was a very good start. It got me it allows me to legally be a personal trainer in person. So that's sweet. But they still to this day teach that you really shouldn't, as of 2 years ago when I researched it, they teach that you shouldn't squat below 90 degrees, which like we know is not true if you have the control to do that. Problem is, many people in the US do not. So if you're teaching to a certain, you're trying to generalize in the way that will keep everybody as safe as possible. You just tell people to not do that because I think it's often easier, it's almost always easier rather to say don't do something than to actually explain the deep nuance on something. And it's one of the things I really appreciated about taking yours was there wasn't a lot of that. It's like, maybe don't do this, but it's also it might have an application for someone depending on their cycle of season and etc. And I guess the lack of dictum I thought was really different, at least from the stuff I've taken for the most part.
Yeah, I have an NASM CES certification, the corrective exercise specialist, and so yeah, I mean, some of it's great, some of it's not great. I mean, I guess the thing with
Mm-hmm.
that is always a little funky too, because you're always working in that gray area, right? Of
Mm-hmm.
what's physical therapy, what's when are you dealing with sort of a medical type based thing where you should be referring
And
out,
then
or what's the scope. But yeah, I mean, the squat's a perfect example, right? Because also there's also the school of thought you should never have your knees over your feet, right? Like, because that puts too
yes,
much stress on the patellar tendon. Well, in cycling, when you push down on the pedals from 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock, your knee is way over your foot.
yeah,
you know, so when I was training very specific strength training for cycling, I specifically went out of my way to have my knee over my foot, because that's where the strain is. That's exactly the mechanics that you're using. But if you look at the position, also on the bike, you're never going, as they would say,
Hmm.
ass to grass. You're never going
Sure.
a full range of motion. So I wouldn't do that, right? I would
Yeah,
do, the
absolutely.
range of motion. But yet, if I was training someone for, posture, if someone was doing like powerlifting or something, you absolutely need to be doing that if they have the proper mechanics and inner
Hmm.
core strength to be able to handle that. So yeah, I think I agree. I think there's a lot of things out there that people just generically say, do this, don't do that, because it's easy, versus
Hmm.
really giving the science and the background, and then saying, look, if there's a use application for it, like I said, like cycling, why wouldn't I put my knees over my feet? It's
Hmm.
because I'm straining my knees all the time. If you want to make that argument, for cycling. So why wouldn't
Yeah.
I do that? It replicate the exact same mechanics and range of motion. So yeah, it's very difficult just to say, do this, don't do that. You really have to look at it on a well, for coaching, for a sports specific application, and you need to also look at it from an individual. Like, can they squat with proper form? Maybe not. I don't know. And then let that decide what you do as far as range of motion. So yeah, it's interesting. That's why we don't do that often. Say, you should or shouldn't do this. It's really like, if you can, great. If you can't, great. But decide on an individual basis.
Yeah, I agree. And like you were a personal trainer forever, like you just developed this eye also, like for like
Yeah,
subtle shifts that are happening. Like you get to figure out when like pronation is just, oh, that's how their foot moves and it's fine, versus like, oh, their ankle's caving in and they're about to shatter their ankle. And it just
yeah,
becomes this thing that you start to develop. It's same with like, again, Coop's been doing this forever and he uses Training Peaks and he's like one of the better in the game. And if you him talking about like what he sees from that data is like, I see that stuff. He sees it 1,000 times faster than I do.
yeah,
And it's just this thing
yeah.
you develop over time. Like you just have to get the
Oh, for
reps in.
sure.
So yeah,
Yep.
setting your basis so that you can get the reps in is I think what a cert's for, personally.
Yeah. And I think too, a lot of people will get a certification or they'll get a degree, and they'll be like, they'll hang their hat on that and be like, I have whatever. And as you said, stuff changes every day. What was right tomorrow is not right today, as far, or
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
debunked today. So we always say, like, the education journey never ends, whether you're in any
Hmm.
field, right? It's not even specific to fitness or coaching, it's to any field, right? But especially I think with coaching, and with fitness, as new studies come out, and as more information comes out, it's important to stay on top of that, because that's how you're going to give the best value and get the best results for your clients. Because and it's not that, providing the bad information today is incorrect. That's all you have. Maybe tomorrow it comes out that half the stuff that came out in that ultra running certification is incorrect, or
Yeah,
who knows. But you do the best with what you have now, but you always have to be educating yourself, in some way, shape, or form.
absolutely. And like I update monthly, if we're going to be honest. Like things are constantly changing. It's just one of those, like you
Yeah.
have to be constantly willing to learn. And I back to the current point, like I feel so many people hold, or so many coaches who've had much higher success than most people I know, right? Will rely on data that they had success on back in the 90s, and
Yeah.
it just doesn't necessarily, like, it carries, but like it's a yes and a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And if we're not updating and adding to our past data, then I feel like we're inevitably gonna not get people the best results.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would add too, and you see this all the time, I'm sure, when you go on coaching websites or personal training websites,
Mm.
it's always about, how many races they've done, which races they've done, what my PR is, and there's this in the fitness world, is how good do I look, right? Do I have a six pack abs? Do I, have 1%
Can
body
verify.
fat,
I close more
Yeah.
sales in person if I'm leaner, which I don't like
Yeah.
that sentence, but it's true.
It's true. It's true. And to some degree, if I say, hey, look, I won Western States, I won UTMB, I won all these things, I'd probably get more clients, because so many athletes, potential, clients of coaches, look for that. Hey, they associate high performance, a high performing individual, or in the fitness world, someone who's looks super lean and whatever, he basically has the body type they want to have the body type of. That therefore means that they'll be able to get me to that too. That's one of the most erroneous things out there.
Yeah.
Do I think that it's helpful, of course, to actually do the sport that you're coaching in and have experience? 100%. But do
Yeah,
you have to
absolutely.
win Western States and UTMB to be a good coach? No. And
Hmm.
I always take the opposite stance. I always argue the reverse, that if I can run a 2:10 marathon, maybe I'd actually make a horrible coach, because I cannot relate, or I might not be able to relate to people that can only run a 8 or 9 minute mile. I just
Hmm.
think, just because I chose good parents and I'm this genetic freak, that everyone's like that. So I
Yeah.
think a lot of times it actually might hurt people. But so that's, if I could stress maybe even one thing on this podcast, is that if people are looking for a coach, look to see if they're a great coach. Don't look to see if they're a great athlete. Get testimonials from people that have worked with them. See what their education is. How do they continually educate themselves? What's their sort of coaching philosophy? All those things are so much more important than how fast someone can run or bike, or how fast they can do an Ironman, or how much weight they can lift, or if they have a six pack or not. Like, that has zero correlation to being a good coach. They might be a good coach, but that's it's not because of those things.
I agree. And it feels like, not going to harp on it too much, but I do appreciate you saying that, because like I'm not fast, man. Like it's not who I am. I do have a fairly heavy deadlift for someone who rarely trains deadlift, because I've,
Yeah.
short tibia and kind of long arms and a very big butt. And as a
Yeah.
result, like it's easy for me to tear weight off the ground.
Sure.
That doesn't necessarily carry over to my like 6'5" client who has short arms for his size and like tries to T-Rex it. Like we just don't do a normal deadlift with him, because he's just going
Yeah.
to snap his back off. And
Of course.
that's not his fault. He's very strong. It's just, not the same human. So yeah, I completely agree that the coach's athletic prowess doesn't necessarily carry over. So I appreciate you
Yeah.
saying that, because I do think it really
Yeah.
matters. And like I was talking with Faith on here, and I think I'm going to put her up. Her episode will be out by the time I get yours out. And she's a fantastic coach, and she's first to say that she's
Great.
not like a high level athlete, and it doesn't actually correlate all that much.
No. And honestly, when I think about, if I were going to hire a coach, I think two things would kind of stick out in my mind. Well, three maybe. Um, well, yeah, maybe two. Are they a student of the sport? Meaning, you know, do they continually educate themselves when they go out for a run or a ride? Are they not just thinking about, I'm going out for a run or ride, but like, oh, that's weird, my knee did that, I wonder why that happened, and then start researching it. Um, so I think that's one. And two is just to really care about your athletes, to really want the best out of them. And it sounds weird that people would go into coaching or training and not do that. But I think for a lot of people, after a while, it just becomes all about the paycheck. I'm going to give everyone the same program. I still know more than they do, so they probably won't really catch on. And it's easier for me, and I make a lot of money that way. And I have 70 athletes in my roster. Whereas if you really care about your athletes, that makes a huge difference, as far as the type of programming you're putting out there. So those are the two things, if I were going to hire a coach tomorrow, I would look for is, are they a student of the sport, and do they really care about their athletes? Those are the two things.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I think that second portion is so important. Like, are you there when you need to be? Is really a big
Yeah.
deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, as we spoke of, that has no bearing on if I can run a 2:10 marathon. I can run a 2:10
Hmm.
marathon and just call it in with my athletes and just give them the same program I did, which is
Hmm.
inevitably going to fail probably. But it's just caring about your athletes and being a student of the sport has no bearing on how fast you are, obviously. So
Love that. So if we look at like one of your certs, what does that process look like to get certified? What will you learn in these? I realize it's sport dependent, but like what will you learn inside of certification? And then like how would you get recertified? Because I personally know they expire, and for anybody else looking at this, they expire. So like how do we go through this process?
yeah, it's a good question. So I sort of modeled our certifications after a 4-year degree sort of smashed down. So like, for example, my first year of my freshman year of college, I had to take anatomy, physiology, I had to take biomechanics, physics, biology, just all the sort of foundational stuff. So that's sort of how the first few modules are. It's anatomy, physiology, biomechanics, nervous system, you energy systems. You learn all about that, basically how the body works. Now, again, you're not going to be a doctor or anything clearly, but you're going to learn how, the basics of it, as far as how the body functions, so you can apply it later. And then after that, it gets into the application part. So whether it be ultra running, triathlon, it goes into the specific biomechanics of those things. It gets into the specifics of how to build a training plan, nutrition. It covers to the scope of what a coach can and should do, not to the scope of where they can be creating diet plans or nutrition plans, anything like that. But it gets into the specifics. So it sort of starts out foundational, and then it goes into the application of it. From a recertification point, this is another area that I I have a lot of contention with, because again, a lot of it is just money grabs, both in the coaching industry and the fitness industry. So
Feels
we have
like
two
it.
options. It does. It's really can be really irritating. You can either
Yeah.
take a recertification exam, which I believe is $99. You can recertify, so you're staying up
Hmm.
to date with the content, or, and this is actually what I prefer, for no fee, you can write a paper. Again, it has to cite professional journals. You're not doing the research yourself, but you're citing professional journals. So it's, you're not citing, like your best friend's blog. And it can be on any topic in endurance sports. It doesn't have to be, we don't tell you what it has to be, but it has to be in endurance sports. And
Mm.
it's free. There's no cost. We don't charge you for it. There's no renewal fee, but, and it's every 2 years. And because what I personally found, and this is sort of my bias, is that if I'm going to write a paper, I want to write a paper on something I'm interested in.
Hmm.
And it's sort of a win-win, because when these athletes, or when these coaches, I should say, write these papers, not only do they learn a lot and become recertified, but then we get to share the paper that they wrote with all of our coaches as well. So then all the coaches that UESCA certifies, or those that care to read it in the coaches group, benefit from the information and the research that this person did to write their continuing education paper.
That's cool, man. Yeah, and I really appreciated that. I was in the process of like looking into that and then realized I get restarted by going to the conference. So I am not,
Yep.
but I was definitely because I am busy. But it was a thing. Then I will just use my own. I have an athlete who has just an egregiously high 3 liter an hour sweat rate and lives in
Mm.
Texas. And so we
Oh,
have been
wow.
throwing everything at the wall to keep him not dying this summer, and it's been a challenge.
Yeah,
So like
I bet.
hyperhydration was going to be the topic, and it
Mm.
because I was doing it anyway, like doing the work,
Yeah,
right? And so
sure.
we have like sodium loading, glycerin, like all these protocols, and it is nice to be able to maintain your certification with like just by doing your job better. So that's a nice thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's cool. It's like you hear it a lot with in the medical world when someone has like a disease, right? Like like let's say if I got XYZ type of cancer tomorrow, I'm going to do all the research I can on that. And you go from zero to essentially an expert overnight, and it's like you
Mm,
don't know what you don't know until you start researching stuff. So a lot of the feedback we get from these coaches that have written the paper is they'll write it on whatever topic, and they say, wow, I thought I knew a lot about this topic till I started actually doing real, getting research articles, and I turns
yeah,
out I didn't know much at all, and now I feel
and
like I'm kind of an
confirm.
expert in
Yeah.
this one area. And it's very cool. And it's true, you don't know what you don't know until you start digging in. And I think that's also where at least me personally, I'm sort of in awe of like those presenters at the conference, because they know what they know and they don't know what they don't know. I think one thing too, and this is sort of deviating from the topic, but one of the red flags for me, is when people are these sort of know-it-all people, when they know everything. They'll never say, I don't know something. At that conference, we heard from some of the most knowledgeable people out there in respiratory therapy and environmental physiology. And a lot of when people would do the Q&A, as you remember, a lot of the responses were, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about that, or I'll get back to you. And I'm sure they probably knew more about that topic that they're saying they don't know a lot about than most people do, but because they weren't
Yeah.
the experts, they didn't feel it was their place to say things. So the other thing I'll say when people are looking for a coach is, you know, to not test them, but to see like, well, what is your expertise? And if they say everything, that's a red flag, you know, like versus, you know, say, this is what I know, this is what I can help you with. Other, you know, I'll refer out, you know, I would refer you to other people.
Mm-hmm.
That's what a professional coach does. And again, I know I just kind of went off on a tangent there,
No, it's fair.
but I think that's another red flag, I would say, if people are looking for a coach. There's people that say they can do it all, from the biomechanics to nutrition to whatever. It's like, you might know a little bit about all that stuff, but you're, like I said before, you're not an expert. And I think hearing all those real experts say, I don't know, even in the area of their expertise, say, oh, that's a good question, I've never actually come across that before, though, that's a sign of someone who knows their stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, just to dig a little more into that point, like, what do you actually need in a coach too? Right. So like I um know quite a few who don't do strength work. And honestly, some of them shouldn't, because they don't know anything about it.
Yeah,
And that's okay. And I don't judge that at all. I actually really appreciate those who stay in their lane. But if
yep,
you need strength work, and that is one of your bigger priorities, either also hire a strength coach if your coach doesn't do it, or find one who does. Like, know that
yeah,
the things you need, and then find the coach who actually does the stuff that you do. Like
yeah,
my knowledge is like, I've tried to build mine like moderately shallow but pretty wide, so I can do fairly surface level stuff for most people. And
sure,
but probably strength is my bigger bigger aspect, I guess, at the moment. And if someone comes to me with like hormone stuff, like, that's not my jam. And like, you
yeah,
should either go find like an endocrinologist or a coach who knows a lot more than that, right, about that.
yeah.
And I'll be very upfront about that. So like, it's one of those, like, knowing what you know and being willing to like lean into that and like learn more.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. For me, even though I was in the fitness space and nutrition is obviously tied to weight loss, which is why so many people
Mm-hmm.
do it, like, it's just something I never knew much about. I never really
Mm-hmm.
honestly cared to know much about. It wasn't like in your words, it wasn't my jam. I mean, like, you know, I
Yeah, I
mean,
get that.
my nutrition information would be telling them to eat a box of Cheez-Its and gummy bears and, you know, call it a day. Like, that's probably not ideal, right? So like, I would
Yeah,
refer
but I
them
love
out
that
because it's
though. And
just,
like, that's how I
yeah.
started though. Like, nutrition was like where I like first got into fitness. I loved it.
Oh,
Like, my
nice.
search there, like, pretty long listed. But yeah, I love when people just, yeah, I don't know, man. Because I mean,
Yeah.
not so much in the gym where I currently am, but at a gym previously, I just hear stuff like across the room that is just like, no, it
Yeah.
is not correct. It's neither how the
Right.
human body works, nor is like a gummy bear going to immediately give you diabetes. So maybe take a breath. And
Right.
I appreciate hearing coaches like, I don't know, man. Like, let me look it up or for you out. I think it's really an
Yeah.
important thing to say.
Yeah, for sure. It's like, yeah, and it's like mine was like a double whammy because not only did I not know about it, I didn't care to know about it. So it was
Yeah,
always, and
no,
you
it's
know, we
most people
had,
don't. Yeah.
yeah, and at the gyms where I at, you know, we always had RDs and
Uh-huh.
stuff. So I'd be like, you know, go see Catherine. She's
Mm-hmm.
the RD on site. She'll help you out. Because again, like if you
100%.
ask me, I'm going to tell you to just eat steak and gummy bears. So that's probably you probably don't have a place. You're not going to pay me for that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think staying in your lane, both in terms of scope of practice and scope of knowledge, is so critically important. You know, at the gyms I've worked at, you know, I would see these trainers because everyone has to pay rent. I totally get
Yeah.
that. They would take on, you know, someone would say, "Hey, I've got, you know, a torn rotator cuff, you know, um, whatever to my SI joint, you know, a fractured toe, and whatever, you know." And they're like, "Yeah, I can take you on." And inevitably, what happens is they can't, right? So the progress stalls or they get them more injured. And it's such a bad way to go about it. So inevitably it catches up to you. But so yeah, when you're first starting out, turning away clients or referring them to someone else is tough because it looks like it's money that's just going out the door that you're not
Yeah.
actually getting in your bank account. And I completely understand that. But at the end of the day, you're a professional, whether it be coach, trainer, whatever. You have to stay in your lane, 100%.
Yeah. And I would say any coach who says they've never taken an edge case is probably a liar. Like,
Yep.
you gotta grow and adapt and not do that. And also probably have a
Yep.
system for if you still accidentally do that, right? Like I've definitely um taken a couple and it resulted in a on my end voluntary refund where I'm just like, we're not a good fit. Like this just
Yep.
isn't the thing. You should go talk to this person, right? Like
Yep.
that's where that fits. And I think to some
Yep.
degree you need to be I realize financial place is tough sometimes, especially like you're not going to make anything as a trainer for the first couple months. It's just or years. It's just what it is.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
but you have to have like the long term integrity aspect of it as well.
Yeah. And the long game is so important because I think what a lot of trainers and coaches don't understand is it is that saying goes, it takes a village, right? So when you
Mm,
refer these clients to a biomechanist, to a nutritionist or, registered dietitian, to whoever, those people, you now have a relationship with them, right? And those people might refer people back to you. So again, is it immediate? No, but will you have a larger network and will it most likely serve you well in the long run? From a financial standpoint, absolutely.
absolutely.
But even irrespective of that, that's still the right thing to do. You have to refer out if they're not the right fit or if it's outside your scope of knowledge or practice.
100%.
So
Well, thank you, Rick. I really appreciate it. I like your cert, at least the one I have, and I've looked at a couple other ones. And yeah, I think you're doing a really good thing. Is there anything else you'd like to share, or like how people can find you, or any of the things that we should know?
yeah, I mean the easiest way to find us is just online on our website, uesca.com, uesca.com. And then yeah, all of our offerings are there. Blog posts, podcasts. We also have a podcast as well. So yeah, all that stuff is there sort of so you can get a better feeling for the company. But yeah, no, I really appreciate I really appreciate having me on. It's been fun chatting with you.
I love that. And I guess like on that note, something you didn't mention, so I'm going to do it for you, is you have started to do these like specialization courses. And I took Justin's on psychology. I thought it was really good. I don't want to be a race director, so I didn't take the other one, but like what are
Yeah.
you looking at coming down the pike for some of those or like other offerings that might be coming in the future? Because I know that like if you take two of those, that's another way to research, which is really cool. So like
Yeah.
what's coming down the lane on that?
So we have a few. We have a swim stroke freestyle swim stroke analysis
Awesome.
being done right now. This guy Brenton Ford, who's one of the top Australian swim coaches, specifically who works with triathletes.
That's
We
super
have
cool.
a self defense course coming up, which I know it sounds kind of weird, but it's not your typical self defense stuff. Like stop, don't get away. It actually goes into it's based off a model called TFT, target focused training, and it's
Nice.
based off of biomechanics, and it's also based off the theory of do everything you can to avoid an altercation. But if you are in an altercation or in a situation, you have to do everything in your power to do it. So it's going to be very interesting. It's incredible content. Speaking going back to the bike accidents, also I feel like we don't go, unfortunately, more than like a month or so when you don't hear of a jogger, oftentimes a female, who was assaulted on a
Mm-hmm.
run. And that was sort of the genesis for having this one. It's giving people the tools to know what to do if they're in a situation that in theory could be life or death. um, that's coming
Great.
down the pike. We have a few others. Female physiology certification is going to be coming, or certificate course, specialization course is going to be coming out. Gait analysis will be coming out. Wilderness survival, because again, a lot of it, whether it be gravel or ultra running, a lot of times you're out there in the woods. So those things are going to be coming out. So the goal is to have about 15 to 20 of these specialization courses. In the genesis for those is that you don't have to have taken one of our certifications to purchase these, but it's sort of like, okay, you took ultra running, you took running, you took triathlon, and you liked it, you learned a lot, but you really really want to learn a lot more about XYZ, taking deep dives into specific areas. So that's what the specialization courses are really for, kind of like you said with sports psychology. We have it in our certifications, but that takes a much deeper dive.
I yeah, love it. And all of those sound very worthwhile to be added to the sphere of coaching. So I think that's super cool.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
stoked about gait analysis and a few other ones as well. So, and the
Yeah.
survival one I think would be very key. So yeah,
Yeah.
man, it's awesome.
Yeah. So I did a podcast with Stephen Littlewood. He's the creator. He was actually at the conference. He's going to be the guy putting that together, does a lot of search and rescue
Cool.
stuff. And
Yeah, I want
again,
to
it's
actually get him on
incredible.
here for sure. He seems
Yeah,
cool.
it's incredible the amount of knowledge. He's such a great guy. The other and you'll appreciate this one, Will. The last certification that we're going to be doing is going to be a strength conditioning certification for endurance sports athletes. So that's the last certification we're probably going to do. The rest will be mostly specialization courses. So that's sort of in development right now, actually, the strength and conditioning certification.
That's awesome,
And
man.
that's being done by Lori Thompson, who is actually, I think she's like 4 or 5 months away from defending her PhD. But her background is also, she's an endurance athlete, but her background is primarily strength and conditioning and all that good
Very,
stuff.
very cool, man. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
So cool
well,
stuff
thank
coming.
Rex. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Well, thanks so much. I will definitely link those in the show notes. Thank you for being here. And we'll have to do this again sometime.
Definitely. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks, man. Thank you for listening to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. Honestly, I'm still surprised and honored that anybody wants to hear what I have to say, so thank you. To be clear, not a doctor, nor a registered dietitian, or any other kind of medical professional. I'm a personal trainer, a nutrition coach, and a running coach, and I have a passion for training trail runners. You should always speak with a qualified medical professional before making any changes to your training or nutrition program. If you enjoyed the podcast or found it helpful, please take a second to leave a rating or review. I'd really appreciate it. Or you could just share it with someone for whom you think it might be helpful. I make these kinds of things in order to provide more quality, free resources to people, so the more people who hear it, the better. If you want more of this information, please head to the Trail and Ultra Running Training group on Facebook, where we discuss all aspects of training so you can have more fun doing the sport that you love. Thank you again for listening.